Nothing in what he is being asked to do matches what the country believes is possible. And yet, on paper, everything seems perfectly aligned. George Marshall puts down his pencil, looks up, and says no. Not no to a scheduling detail, no to a 200-division U.S. Army, in the middle of a world war. Marshall, the chief of staff, spends his days signing off on manpower tables he hates. Columns of numbers, totals of men, tanks, ships. Everything pushes in the same direction. More divisions, always more. Congress wants visible victories. The Allies demand troops. His own generals dream of new large units. On paper, 200 divisions erase all risk. On paper only. The number just sits there. One morning, a file is placed in front of him. On the cover page, a number circled in thick pencil, 213. It's the high estimate, calculated by his planners, of the number of divisions the United States could theoretically field if it mobilized to the maximum. That day, in 1942, Marshall does something that surprises even his close aides. He does not ask whether 213 is attainable. He does not ask how long it would take. He asks what would have to be sacrificed to get there, and he starts crossing out entire columns. Instead of racing toward 200 divisions, he will freeze the U.S. Army at a ceiling of about 90. Deliberately. A silence hangs for a moment over the closed file. Marshall has run his hand over the cover of the file, as if to check that the cardboard was holding up. Then he began to do what he had known how to do since the French trenches: dismantle illusions. Hypothesis A. At first glance, it seems almost obvious. If he refuses to climb to 200 divisions, it's out of caution, out of fear of reliving the slaughter of 1918. The officer who saw the American expeditionary forces swell in a few months would instinctively distrust mass armies. He would have kept in mind the makeshift camps, the columns of poorly equipped men, the logistical improvisations, and would decide to hit the brakes. A soldier scarred by war would prefer a smaller, better-run army to crowds of poorly led conscripts sent to the European front and the Pacific. This hypothesis collapses in a single sentence. At the same time, he approves mass conscription and agrees that the U.S. Army will swell to more than 8 million men. Hypothesis B. It is more appealing, especially when you look at the charts in front of him. Marshall would be, deep down, the cool-headed engineer of an industrial war. In front of him, the production curves for planes, tanks, ships, the projections of the War Production Board, the targets of the Victory Program. He would have treated the Army as an adjustment variable in a giant calculation. Capping the divisions at 90 would allow more men to be shifted to factories, shipyards, aircraft assembly lines. You can picture the scene. He follows with his finger one line representing industrial labor, another showing military strength. With each additional division, the production curve dips and the strategic edifice weakens. So he would choose long-range firepower, bombers, the fleet, heavy logistics, a more compact army, but backed by an ocean of metal. Papers rustle under his hand. Except that internal documents overturn this reasoning. It is not the factories that trigger his refusal of the 200 divisions. The planners estimate that, on paper, the United States can produce enough for more than 200 divisions. The blockage comes from elsewhere, from the invisible weight of each division on the entire support system. Each new large unit is not just infantry and tanks. It is an entire network of service troops, transportation, depots, doctors, mechanics, supply ships, which suck in even more manpower everywhere. Hypothesis C, the unsettling one. Marshall would not have capped the number of divisions at 90 to avoid excess, but because he knew that beyond that point, the Army would start lying to itself. A 200-division army on paper, unable to feed 90 of them at the other end of the world. His choice would then become a brutal filter. Better to know the real ceiling and accept it than to dress up a structural weakness with inflated figures. The final twist flips the previous hypothesis. The industrial calculation is not a cold optimization, it is a barrier of truth. Marshall does not see the wall on a battlefield. He sees it in a cramped office in Washington, the air thick with ink, smoke, and fatigue. A map of the globe covers the back wall. Europe, North Africa, the Pacific. A metal bookend cuts into his wrist each time he leans over the stacks of manpower tables piled on his desk. That small corner of metal, always in the same place, ended up leaving a red mark across his skin. On these sheets, the divisions have nothing abstract about them. Next to the number of men, there are columns one easily forgets. Engineer battalions, medical units, transport groups, ammunition depots, maintenance workshops, construction battalions, supply companies. Every combat division drags behind it a tale of support that never disappears. That's where the wall rises. Not in the barracks, not in the training centers, but in this invisible tail that sucks up manpower day and night. The War Department's reports pile up. The War Manpower Commission is already signaling strains in steelmaking, agriculture, shipbuilding. The monthly draft quotas it receives from the selective service system are becoming harder and harder to meet without pulling workers out of the shops. Cold numbers, but Marshall remembers the men in the mud of France. Without ammunition, without supplies, without usable roads, they are nothing but targets. He reads a memo from the Operations Division. For each additional combat division sent overseas, thousands more service troops are needed. Not a few hundred, thousands. And these units do not go home after a successful offensive. They stay, maintain, move, rebuild. Their consumption of manpower doesn't shrink, it swells. In the meetings, McNair, head of the Army Ground Forces, pushes for more divisions. He wants a robust ground mass, reinforcements, depth of maneuver. Somerville, who leads the Army Service Forces, keeps coming back to the same obsession: logistics. Ports, depots, ships. He repeats that the docks are already overflowing, that every troop convoy takes the place of supply ships. Arnold, for the Air Forces, demands men for his bomber and fighter groups. The strategic bombing campaign in Europe, the air-sea war in the Pacific, all of it rests on a mass of crews and mechanics. Marshall listens to them, but he keeps stumbling over the same thing. A single resistance, hard, compact. The capacity to sustain what is sent. Not just landing divisions in North Africa, in Italy, in Great Britain, in the Pacific Islands, but feeding them, reinforcing them, replacing them, repairing their tanks, evacuating their wounded, burying their dead, replenishing their ranks. The political context moves across the room at every meeting without needing to be named. Isolationism didn't disappear overnight. Congress monitors the length of military service, debates the extension of inductions, counts votes at every closed roll call. The Army cannot simply swallow millions more men without resistance. Each additional call-up translates into a protest letter, local pressure, a furious editorial in a regional newspaper. A pencil sometimes taps, then stops. But that is not what blocks Marshall. He has learned to live with the noise of politics. What paralyzes him is a specific pattern he sees in the numbers. The more divisions increase, the more the proportion of men assigned to support grows in relation to the fighters. Beyond a certain level, activating new divisions almost no longer adds any net combat power. It mainly creates new organizations that must be supplied. Uniform shells, dependent on a system that is beginning to stretch thin. Whenever he tries to imagine 150, 180, 200 divisions, the image that comes to him is not an irresistible wave of troops crossing France or the Philippines. It is a jammed port, cargo ships waiting, trucks immobilized for lack of parts, entire divisions pinned down because no convoy has been scheduled for them. The wall is this: the certainty that beyond a certain threshold, more divisions paradoxically mean fewer divisions actually usable where the war is decided. One evening, he stays alone at the office later than usual. His hand comes back to rest on the same metal corner of the bookend. The mark on his wrist has turned into a small open cut. He realizes he clenches his fist every time he looks at the column, divisions projected 1944 to 1945. Before his eyes, a number that keeps appearing in the forecasts: 90. Not the maximum theoretical projection, the realistic ceiling. That number becomes his wall, and he knows he will have to run into it, publicly. Military historians largely agree that the limit of about 90 divisions resulted from a calculated choice among manpower, logistics, and multiple commitments. Some researchers, digging through the War Department archives and the Green Books, nonetheless point out that this limit was never based on a perfectly stable model. Estimates shifted, assumptions changed, and the balance that was reached sometimes seems to rest on surprisingly narrow margins. What many refuse to admit openly is that at the heart of this decision remains a fear that is anything but theoretical. The fear that an army publicly presented as gigantic might collapse the day it has to fight simultaneously in Europe, in the Pacific, and in the shadow of a Soviet front already saturated with blood. The 90-division ceiling does not remain an abstract figure in a memo. It starts to live at the pace of the campaigns. In Normandy, when the first American divisions land on the beaches and drop paratroopers into the night, Marshall follows from Washington on maps covered with pushpins. Each new beachhead, each breakthrough, each pocket, it's the same divisions that advance, are shattered, and reforged. No infinite stock of fresh units in reserve. The gamble begins there. The same army has to absorb the blows, day after day. Infantry losses soar faster than expected. Reports from the replacement depots come in. The pools of men trained for the infantry are running dry. They tap into artillery units, support services. They shorten and speed up training. Divisions no longer multiply. They are hollowed out, filled up, emptied again. The 90-division limit bears down on every company climbing a hedgerow, on every battalion crossing a river. The maps fill up with dense annotations. When the breakout comes, when American columns rush toward Avranches and then the Seine, American logistical power creates the illusion of overabundance. Truck convoys, fuel, ammunition following along, an impressive machine. But behind the scenes, Marshall knows he has no broad strategic cushion. Europe consumes, the Pacific pulls from the other side. Each division committed on the French front is a division he cannot simply conjure up elsewhere. Then come the Ardennes. The surprise German offensive in the dead of winter suddenly lays the gamble bare. For a few days, the European map Marshall keeps in front of him is covered with alerts. American units pushed back, lines of communication threatened, the need to redeploy divisions at top speed from sectors that had been considered quiet. There is not, in the rear, a mass of intact divisions ready to plug every gap. Everything depends on the ability to move, to stretch, to hold together what already exists. In the Pacific, the same 90 divisions are fragmented, scattered among islands, archipelagos, and the major offensives toward the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The Marines, the Navy, and the Air Forces shoulder a disproportionate share of the burden, but it all comes back to the same constraint. America is waging a global war with a capped ground army. When planners prepare the invasion scenarios for Japan, Olympic and Coronet, they do not suddenly dream of 150 new divisions. They reassign, recombine, project units that already exist. Always the same foundation. In the end, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Soviet entry into the war against Japan abruptly close off this scenario. The question, what would happen if the land war dragged on for another 2 years against Japan, never receives a practical answer. But in the archives, the projections show that even for this horizon, Marshall did not seek to break the 90-division ceiling. He held to his gamble to the very end. What he believed, when he laid his hand on that file with its 213 possible divisions, was that the true strength of a nation at war could be concentrated in industry, ships, aircraft, and logistics, and that a limited ground army, fully supported, would prevail over a scattered and starving mass of reinforcements. He thought that once established, this compromise would remain a kind of stable equilibrium. What gradually collapses over the course of the 1944 and 1945 reports is this illusion of stability. Strains on replacements, understrength divisions, the alarms during the Ardennes, the unwritten worries of field commanders reveal a less comfortable reality. Even with 90 divisions saturated with equipment, the United States is flirting with the limit of what it can sustain simultaneously on multiple theaters. At the end of the war, Marshall looks at a victorious army, endowed with unmatched logistics, a sprawling air force, a gigantic fleet. The decision to stay at 90 divisions has worked. The bet has been won. But what he discovers in negative space is that this bet was never as controlled as he imagined. He had played with margins narrower than what his charts had led him to believe. American power was not infinite. It was simply better organized than that of others. When he later turned to diplomacy, to European reconstruction, to resource management in a ruined world, this silent lesson would remain there, behind every large-scale project. A ceiling always exists, even when no one dares to write it down. Then remains a question, sharper than all the production statistics. If victory depends so much on a deliberate gamble on the limits of one's own strength, how many times can a nation afford to wager like this without losing everything it believes untouchable? In an almost empty office, the sun catches a band of golden dust above a large world map, crookedly pinned to the wall. The metal corner of the bookend is still there, motionless, with a thin brownish stain where the blood has dried. On the desk, a staffing chart is yellowing. The columns aligned, the number 90, circled in pencil, faded, but still visible. In the silence, the hand of a wall clock moves forward in jerks, without anyone watching it.